You're live streaming it.
So for those that have just joined via the live stream, we'll be setting up in a few minutes.
We shall make a start. Are we
Live and direct?
We are live and direct. Am I out of shots?
No.
No, I'm not out of shot. I'm standing in the wrong place. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We are live streaming to our internal audience. If you can't make it here, there might be a slight pause in
Keep going.
but this will be recorded. Should you wish to go and check back on anything and share it amongst your friends. For those who don't know me, I'm Martin Cheney. I do the digital team here at City Hall, so we look after London Gov, the website, but also work on digital transformation and specifically around user-centred design. With me today I have Nick Fine, who has been working with the team for some 6 months. He's worked on a number of projects like Team London, the Good Work Standard, and the Bias Reduction Unit, amongst others. He's a digital psychologist and a user experience expert and all kinds of things, and he's a real doctor.
Not that kind of doctor.
Not that kind of doctor. I won't go on for very much, I'll let Nick carry on, but just for some context, user-centred design is one of those things that's a core part of the way we do things, and we'd like everyone else to make it a core part of the way they do things. It fits in very well with some of our mayoral commitments. Theo's here today as our Chief Digital Officer, and with our Smarter London roadmap, making more user-designed services is a key part of those commitments. So we thought we'd share what we know, what Nick knows. Some nice real-world examples in there. And I'm at risk of talking about what Nick's going to talk about, so I'm going to calmly shut up and let Nick carry on. So thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today, everybody. My name is Nick Fine. I'm a user researcher on Martin's digital team. I want to spend the next 30 to 40 minutes talking about user centricity, user-centered design, and what that means to GLA. It doesn't matter which function, what role you play here at GLA, user centricity or user-centered design is for literally everybody, every role, every function throughout government, be it local or central. And the story that I'm going to tell you over the next 45 minutes is going to show you what it is and what it can do for you, what it can do for us, what it can do for citizens. So, kicking things off, why do this stuff? User-centered design improves the lives of users of anything, products and services. It improves the lives of Londoners. It improves the lives of citizens. It improves the lives of voters. And really, ultimately, it improves the lives of everyone. And when I say everyone, I include GLA staff, civil servants of all types. Whether you're a policy maker, whether you're executing policy or a practitioner, it doesn't matter. It improves the quality of output, the quality of experience for everybody. How does that happen? It means putting the user at the very centre of the design process. At the moment, that might not mean that much to you. I'm going to talk you through this now, through our journey, which is how do you involve the user in the design process to produce better public services? This slightly modified quote from the Design Council. The central premise of user-centered design is that the best designed products and services result from understanding the needs of the people who will use them. And I've highlighted the understanding the needs because that is front and center. That is the beating heart of user-centric design, our user needs. And everything that I do is all about understanding user needs in their contexts. Everything else is detail. What are the benefits to you, your teams, your audiences, your citizens of user-centered design? First of all, citizen influence. We can directly improve Londoners' lives through the provision of public services that are relevant and useful by being informed by their needs. So, in the old world, traditionally, government dictates to citizens, and dictates is quite a strong word. You can see what we're saying. It's much more one-way, top-down, government to citizens, be that services or products or anything else. What's happening in the more modern world is that citizens are informing government. And we're going to talk about this and policy development in a little while. But this is all about understanding their user needs and their pain points in those actual contexts and helping that to inform government. The citizen influence, this two-way discussion, is a new paradigm. Business transformation, and I talk about us as a business. Involving citizens in the development of public services improves business decision making and changes business priorities, product roadmaps, delivery methods, etc. It focuses your mind, your roadmaps, by actually meeting the immediate needs of the users in their context of use. It transforms businesses. The reason why Martin is so big on user-centered design is because as Director of Transformation, it transforms. I've seen this happen. It is one of the most powerful weapons, or one of the most powerful devices we have to change businesses and the world for good. So the old world looked very much like this, and this definitely exists in parts of business today. The waterfall methodology, which is very much, and anybody from TG and from IT world will recognize this and kind of be, not laughing at it, but glad it's in the rearview mirror. Because this was all about very heavy upfront business requirements. I had to understand what you want 3 years in advance of delivery. That's really difficult when we live in a very dynamic environment where policies, the world, the environment, everything changes. So you get all your BAs involved, all your business analysts, and you try to understand what's this thing we're trying to build. You design it, you build it, and you test it. You find out down here that after several £1 million in multi-agency spend, that this wasn't the thing we wanted to build. Becomes a problem. So the more modern world, we have this ongoing citizen participation, or the agile way. And the agile way involves people all the way through this process. Now if you look at this time scale, the project duration is the same for two of these images. But if you look at the one on the right hand side, in an agile world, you have user research happening regularly during this duration, as it's going through. So we have regular touch points with citizens all the way through. So you have constant user involvement. Whereas here in the old world, there were no users. And you'd finally get it out and you'd show it to a user and they go, I can't use this thing, it doesn't meet my needs, what do I do with it? And you spent so much money and so much time and bad things happen. We've seen this happen repeatedly over decades. I'm talking about in generally, by the way, not necessarily GLA, just to cover my own neck. The societal impact. We can contribute to societal improvement through behavioural changes that come from meeting those user needs and changing citizens' priorities, helping them with their lives. So again, very much, the old world was very much government dictates policy to the people. Whereas user-centric policy development very much is a two-way process. It's involving citizens in this discussion. It's a two-way street. It's no longer top-down and it isn't bottom-up. Not the tail wagging the dog either. There is this middle ground, this beautiful middle ground of discussion. Validity, and the V word, validity is something very close to my heart as a scientist, but in the digital world or in the wider world, validity is a massive issue. Fake news being the biggest symptoms of a lack of validity. So constant user feedback from people, from citizens, means that we keep the validity of the thing that we're building high. It's making sure all the way through that we're meeting the needs of the people that we're building the thing for. Now I know that sounds screamingly obvious, but it isn't, okay? That doesn't happen. It's about saying, look, I need to go get a hammer as a carpenter, and somebody builds a hammer who's never been a carpenter before, and they produce this really unwieldy thing that I can't use. It doesn't meet my needs as a practitioner. So again, we go back to this sort of a model. You have user feedback at the back end here, happening throughout the project. So you can't get too far away from the right thing because you're constantly checking throughout. Make sense? And resource efficiency. The transformation that arises from this user centricity is significant because you save so much time and money building the right thing instead of the wrong thing, and you learn that earlier. In the old world, that waterfall kind of way that we looked at a moment ago, into the project, maybe a stakeholder says something, or something in your competitive environment changes, or in the policy world changes. And we say, look, the thing we were going to be building isn't the thing that we want to build anymore. So you have to put in a change request. And anybody who's worked in that waterfall way will know that change requests are horrible. It makes life horrible. You're changing course. It's nothing but migraine. Really bad. On the other side, though, we have this flexible process which is supported by Agile, which means that the world can change. Change is expected. Okay, instead of just hoping that it doesn't happen, which is a really difficult way to operate, if you follow a methodology which is user-centric and agile, you get to handle the change as it happens and therefore build the right thing as you're going, right? Another really important thing to note here, and see this little grey box in the bottom right-hand corner. I've called it phase 2, but the point is in the agile or the more flexible user-centric world, there is no end point. It's a really important point. We just don't go, I've built this thing, it's perfect in every way, I walk away from it. We are constantly iterating, constantly fixing it, constantly improving it. So it's not like we throw it away after 5 years and build a new thing. We spend those 5 years making this thing the best it reasonably can be. Now, this is the bane of one of my lives, and I need to make some clear distinctions between user research and market research. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes going through this. Apologies if you know this already. Market research typically is about asking people what they want, whereas user research is typically about finding out what they need. So if you ask people what they want, they'll often tell you, I want cake. What they really need is kale or broccoli or sprouts or something that's a lot healthier. So to very briefly contrast the two, and this is not an exclusive comparison, market research tends to be self-reported. It's about asking people what they want. As a psychologist and as a scientist or as a behavioural psychologist, self-reporting for me has very little value. For user researchers in general, it tends to be observational. It's about observing people's behaviour, because behaviour is a lot more honest than self-reporting. And that's not that people intentionally are dishonest. They just are. They will report things that are much more aspirational rather than real world and their real needs. So they'll say cake instead of kale. But it's still important to understand the cake part. So for example, market research might ask, how many rough sleepers are there? How does the number compare year on year? Where are the highest numbers of rough sleepers? Can you see what that's trying to achieve? It's much more quantified. Tends to be. That's why I'm using the word tend a lot. On the right-hand side, the user research side, there's sort of thing, what are the causes of rough sleeping? What are the user needs for rough sleepers? Or what can GLA do to help rough sleepers? Can you start to see there's a little distance between those two? It would be a case of me going out to wherever rough sleepers are, talking to them, observing them, understanding the support systems, the hostels, all the things around them in their ecosystem, in their context. Whereas the market research might be speaking to different agencies and finding out the numbers, or speaking to police to find out about arrest numbers, or I don't know where these insights might come from. So, applying user-centric design. User researchers like myself, we are effectively fundamental to the process of user-centered design. It's about bringing those insights, those user needs to the stakeholders, to the design teams, to the policy teams, so that you can make the most appropriate decisions based on the best possible intel. But there are two types of user research that we typically do. One is discovery, which happens at the front, typically at the front of that sprint we talked about, and validation research at the back side of things, where we are looking at checking, did we execute it right? Did we build it right? Does it work for the actual intended audience? So discovery research is really about understanding the user needs and pain points of the target audiences, ideally within the actual context of use. So for example, what are the needs of youth workers looking for activities for their young people? What are the needs of GLA staff with regards to meetings and meeting rooms? What are the needs of European Londoners in advance of Brexit? What sort of questions, what fears, what pain points do they have? The sorts of research methods that support that. Contextual observation, standing in the place, Ethnography is another variation of it, where you're actually in the context. Whether you're actually interacting or not is the difference, but it's kind of fly on the wall versus an interactive contextual observation. So I might be there saying, why did you do that? Or I might just be standing back and watching somebody going, oh, flip, I couldn't do this thing, and then I can note down that there's a trouble at that point in the process. So understanding the actual context, user interviews to an extent, user testing, which is effectively putting somebody in front of a computer or in front of the actual asset and service and asking them to perform basic tasks to see if they can achieve them. So, would you please buy the red shoes? Would you please apply to become a Team London volunteer? Those sorts of things. And of course workshops, and I'll be running a workshop with the LEAP team later this week. This is all about understanding the needs of the business, usually, of stakeholders. What are they trying to achieve? That helps me understand the context of the project and what its ultimate goals are. So the discovery research usually happens within each sprint. And the sprint is a 1 or 2 week, typically, work package, shall we say, work time frame. I have worked on sprints where I've done, in a 2-week sprint, you do a discovery piece of research and a validation piece of research each week, which is somewhat insane, but you can get an idea of exactly how fast you can go with that kind of a configuration. So we move into validation research. You might have heard it as user testing. User testing is where we literally put them in front of the asset again and get them to use it. So there's 2 kinds here. There's local user testing, and some of you have probably been participants of mine on projects here in City Hall. Local user testing is you come in, we sit down together, I ask you to do something and I watch you do it. Remote user testing, which is something we're trying to introduce, is where we obviously do it remotely, where I'm not sitting next to you, where you might be in your home or wherever your actual context is. And there are massive benefits to both. On the remote user testing side of things, we've got 2 kind of forms of it. There's moderated and unmoderated. So moderated is, it's like me sitting next to you, but you're at home. So I can say to you, Dave, would you mind now trying to become a volunteer on Team London? Or then I could say, the benefits of moderated is that I can jump in and steer the conversation. I can say to you, actually that's great, why did you do that? Why didn't you click on that? Or these sorts of questions. Unmoderated, which is by far the most common form of remote testing, is when you get sent a link and you click on the link and it has a little task that says, please go buy some red shoes or sign up to be a Team London volunteer. And it records the screen for you and sends it over to me. Sometimes it's got a little camera recording of your face there, and it allows me, it's very similar to me watching the recording back if we were sat together. Really very powerful, loads of insight that comes from both of these methods. Watching people using the thing that you built is incredibly powerful. So examples might be testing within the agile sprint of the latest prototype or production code. When I say that, sometimes we build wireframe prototypes because they're quick and dirty and they're easy to iterate. Other times we might be iterating a live piece of code, so a website or something, and in which case we can test with that actual live code. Or regular audits to ensure needs are still being met. And that's a really important thing to do because so many times, we live in our digital world, it's fairly crazy in that it moves really fast, really rapidly. It's very, very dynamic. And so worlds, needs, things change. So being able to run an audit just to double check, is it still meeting the needs of my users, is a very, very useful and sensible thing to do. So applying this. I wanted to just talk about web analytics and how that works with user centricity, because the 2 are effectively 2 sides of the same coin to an extent. I think it's fairly safe to say that we are all tasked with building public services for Londoners that are useful, usable, and used, amongst other things. That's just that. And in order to do that, we need to be informed. And this is where the work that I do in user research and my colleague Beiruz does in web analytics, we both are able to understand our digital assets from very different perspectives. But you as consumers of digital, as users of our team, these are both services which are available to you to help you understand your projects and your audiences. So I'm understanding the user needs, and what Beirut is doing with the web analytics is monitoring the actual use, looking how do people actually use the website, the thing that we built. So Beirut will be asking what's happening. Imagine that he's looking on his web analytics like he's looking at a radar or sonar, some kind of top-down view of the world. And in that he can see all of our various different projects that we have running at the GLA, and there's lots at the same time, 30, 40, 50, so to speak. Beirut can tell you, or a web analytics person or a data scientist will tell you something's happening. There's a spike, or there's a trough, something changed has happened. They can see through their numbers on their radar that something's happened, but they don't know why. And that's where I come in. That's where the user researchers come in, because we can understand why is that thing happening. We can go find out for them. So if you're building a new service, any of you across any function at the GLA, and you want to understand what do Londoners need, user research. What should we build and how should we build it? Those are very much user research questions. On the other side of the table, if you're looking at an existing service, how is it currently being used? What's the engagement like? What's the impact? And where are the issues? Can you see how incredibly valuable having both user research and web analytics are to understand that situation? Absolutely critical. Moving us forwards into what is probably in the last 5 years, this new concept of user-centered policy design, UCPD. User-centered policy design means putting the user at the heart of the policy design process. You can effectively user-center anything, because when you involve users, you make it better. And so if you apply that same thinking to policy design, you get the same sorts of outputs. You get a better policy that works for the people for what they need it to do. So I've just pulled out, this is here from gov.uk, this is the Ministry of Justice blog. This here was dated February this year, so fresh, okay? This is fresh stuff that's going on right now. And there are the MOJ, I think HMRC, there's a few different user-centric policy design groups around. If you're a policy person and this is your area and you're interested by it, come talk to me and I can point you in the right direction to help follow up on this stuff. There are communities all around government. You should definitely join, get involved with that conversation and bring that in-house. So I've just highlighted in yellow here a few really nice little snippets through these couple of blog posts. So we've shown that user-centered design adds value in policy. We've influenced the culture of the MOJ. We've built a new capacity in the civil service. We've inspired future generations of leaders. And we've supported other departments to be user-centric. Now, when I talked earlier about business transformation and the effect that user-centered design can have, this is it in effect. This is some of your evidence to show it works. We have other people who are effectively trailblazing a little bit further ahead, who have said, look, we've tried this out and it's working. So in the very least, consider it, in the very least. So, yeah.
I have a question. Sorry if it's too early to ask that question, but when you have the data that you get after user research, which is not giving you a clear indication of what the user needs are, how do you determine? So give you an example, when I was at HMRC, we did 4 rounds of user research on PAYE. And it was a mixed bag basically. It was so close to call, it was 49 to 51%, where some people were saying in favor of something, the others were. How do you basically bottom it out, saying that which is the right way to go?
You have 2 user needs there, 2 audiences, 2 segments.
But we couldn't do both basically. It was the opposite of each other basically. So
we'd have to go into, and I think we'll talk about that one offline because there's probably quite a bit of detail there. But by excluding 49% of the audience, so that's a significant problem. I understand what you're trying to say. I would, if it was me and knowing very little as I do now, I would be saying, look, we have to meet the other 49% needs. And so if you don't have the money, we have to find a way to make this service, whatever the PAYE thing was, work for, because you've got user need A and user need B.
Yeah.
And you can't just go, well, we've only got enough money for one. There has to be a way to do that. I think it's just smarter thinking, or maybe a little bit more research to try to understand what's going on. Or maybe, and this is talking about validity, when I've been in other places, actually was in central government, there's a lot of research done that is not what I would consider valid. It's a very small sample, so I don't know how many people were sampled in that particular PAYE example.
It was 25 roughly, so 5 people each session, we did 4 or 5 sessions.
But you can understand how 25 people may or may not represent 50 million people in the UK, or whatever that number is. And so, you know, I would effectively say, look, I want to see the script, I want to see the methodology, let's see if we can actually run that again and get you a better, more polarized example with a better valid, better design experiment, effectively. But I'd be fighting to get either more money or build to that second user need. What they put here is effectively the basic principles. Give civil servants a working understanding of design and user-centered design, the value of user-centered design, and how to bring the approach into their work. Exploring user needs, design something new, or optimize something that already exists. And that's kind of what we're doing today, right here, right now. Generating user insights, so give civil servants ways of finding out who their user is and what their latent needs are, and converting this into design solutions. Involving people in design, give managers a working understanding of design and how to involve people practically in generating opportunities and designing solutions. And finally, learning from testing ideas in practice. Give civil servants a working understanding of iterative prototyping as an approach to refining solutions, blah, 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 blah. In terms of iterative prototyping, I can talk to you about later on. We have ways of doing things really quickly in the digital team using wireframe prototypes. So if you want to do a workshop where we do some sketches and start to very rapidly visualize things, that's all in play. This is apolitical. I'm sure most of you probably signed up to apolitical. Again, this is dated February 19 again. We've pioneered the model of having in-house policy design teams in the UK. We've established the value of user-centered design outside of digital. Brilliant stuff. We deliver value and build capability across the department, and we never stop reflecting, iterating, and adapting. That's what I was saying to you before about we're never done. There's no end state. It's a constant iteration, ongoing. If you know the Japanese term kaizen, a constant improvement, it's that same sort of principle. Now, again, for any TG people in the room, I don't want to teach anybody to suck eggs here, so this is not an agile lecture. I'll just preempt you there. However, agile and user research and user-centered design are effectively inextricably linked. You can be user-centric without agile. Agile and user-centricity is like the superpower, the turbocharging it. It puts it on steroids and makes it go much, much faster. So agile is typically, again, we're not teaching anybody to suck eggs, but in a typical, it's about learn something, make something, test something, and repeat that. And you just keep doing that. So your sprint cycle looks something like this. So the learning bit is your discover. You make something, might be a design. We test that design. You might build it, make something again, and test it. Now effectively, it looks a bit like that. Okay? It's this magic spin cycle, which produces brilliant, usable outputs. What happens is you put those cycles together in sprints. And what happens then, you could have lots of sprints. And 12 sprints is nothing. I joined a project like Sprint 39, and that's me just starting. So don't think that each one of these can be 2 weeks, 1 week, a month, however you want to define those. But what I'm getting to quite quickly is, and what I want to show you is, all the stuff we talked about earlier about involving users throughout, it's happening throughout the spin cycle every week or every 2 weeks. So can you see, it doesn't matter what you're building, whether it's a mobile app, a policy, it doesn't matter. You've got users all the way through, you can't ever go that wrong. Now, this is the good stuff. Because you have this ongoing user involvement, without the E on the end, sorry about that, this one slide, in my humble opinion, is user-centric design in a nutshell. Okay? It's using people regularly throughout the life cycle and ongoing and rapidly iterating. If you take away anything from today, please take this away. dream about it. It works. It changes the world. So, what outcomes can we expect from being user-centric people? We will create services that people like, use and recommend, which is a big deal. Right? We're here to make people's lives, to make Londoners' lives better. We will create services that make everybody's lives easier. And I have a chap here who has accessibility needs. And again, we're talking about an all-inclusive, completely diverse way of thinking. This is not exclusive to anybody. This is literally for everybody. We will have increased engagement with all the projects and all the campaigns, everything that we work upon as a team. We will have more traction. People will be talking about it more, broadcasting it more. Your earn channels, your learn channels will all explode because you've got people who will, in theory, be enthusing about something that made their life better, improve their experiences. So, and finally, what can you do next? As I said at the beginning, I work for Martin Cheney on the digital team in external relations. If you want, we have, I hope everybody's on Microsoft Teams. There is a community called the User-Centered Design Community. I'm just going to flip back to here. Within Teams, in the bottom of it, there's a create or join team. Join the User-Centered Design Community. There's a joining code, which I don't know why, but there is, to keep this community nice and safe. So please take a photograph of that, come mail me afterwards, join the community, and if you have any other questions, if you would like to get involved, like to learn more, please either mail digital@london.gov.uk or come talk to any of the digital team, Martin or any of my colleagues. Anybody have any questions? Sure.
Maybe you said it already, implicit within your presentation, but what is the end objective for the GLA across all of our work streams, both as users and people working for Londoners?
The objective is effectively to streamline effort, to produce better, when I say work smarter, I'm not saying we're not working smarter, it's just to work better in terms of the effort, the resources that we spend, the time, the money, everything that we spend means that we will build better services for the people that use them. I've been here 6 months now, and I don't think this is unfair to say. I've heard it said too many times. Why isn't anybody using this thing that we've built? And it's because the old school way is we have multiple meetings and we sit and we discuss and we try to desperately understand what our citizens need and want. But we don't always get it right because we're not them and we're not in their context, we don't walk in their shoes. So when we involve them, it just gets better.
I guess, maybe I didn't contemplate my question well enough as well, is then, in terms of the broad width of the work that we do, it's how we then apply this. Particularly when we all work, there's some teams usually late, but particularly working externally with communities as an example, and you might be devising community-based services for any other policy area. And it's how we involve them. Now I know actually there are teams who work very closely with communities already, so I'm suggesting that work isn't happening, but it implies quite a lot of ongoing work with those users throughout the life of the project. And I think there are elements of the GLA which would respond to this very easily, and others where I think there's a lot more thinking to be done. So I guess that's my question.
It's absolutely a great question. I'll save Nick because he's probably not the best place to answer that. But all we're trying to do is getting shots. All we're trying to do is ask people who are interested to come and talk to us, and we can help you. Basically, we know this works, and we can help you in whatever it is you do. So our call to action is just drop us a line and come and have a conversation and see how we can help.
Sometimes people need a little bit of convincing, and it's normal because they've worked their ways and they say this works, I know it works, and I'm happy with it. I'm going to just show you a piece of video.
While you're looking at your videos, I just to say, your earlier point about this is a new way of working. I think sometimes policy changes and you describe things in a different way. So I have worked on programs previously where there was actually quite a lot of local people involvement and policy or, usual communities was the intervention that I was immediately thinking of when you started talking about it. And so we did a lot of work in terms of preparing people locally to be able to play that active part. So I think my point as well is if we really want to implement this, then there's quite a lot of consideration to make it work both as the GLA and then the other stakeholders that we might want to engage with.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
What I'll show you is, I'm going to show you just literally one clip from one of the user testing. I've got consent to do this. What you're going to see here, this is just a very small piece of work we did on the EU Londoners Hub. That's a provider, you can see a provider of advice. What I wanted to just show you is what effectively this looks like, because what happens is when you're talking about getting engagement and when people have seen this for the first time, me sitting here, I probably should have built this into my presentation, probably should have shown you the actual coal front rather than talking about it from a distance. I think I need to iterate this. The point here is, let me show you this, I don't know if you can hear this.
Okay, it's nice that there's lots of different languages. It does feel like it's corporate if people know about the Londoners Open slogan. So my reaction is, oh God, that's just Sadiq Khan advertising himself again. But not everyone might be versed enough in politics to react.
Maybe not the best choice of... I just grabbed one. But the point here is, you can see her feeding back to me, looking over something and understanding that, okay? If she was saying, look, where's the call to action? Or who is Sadiq Khan? Or what is ULEZ? Or whatever any of these questions are, we haven't done our job right, if you know what I mean, okay? It's like we haven't communicated in the right way. So to go back to what you were saying, when people see this kind of thing firsthand on their particular projects, suddenly it's like, oh wow, why haven't we done this before? When can I get it done next? And I see when I'm in a lab, where you have people doing this thing and we're all on the other side of the glass. I've had marketing or comms directors, the epiphany is so big that I go, why haven't we ever done this before? I never want to not do this again. So it's so transformative, but sometimes you need the evidence to show it to get that traction.
And I'm agreeing with you. Obviously, if it didn't sound like obviously really it was valuable, but that's not my point. I think maybe I'm not being that clear. I just think it's how do we make sure that everybody who we might want to engage with can engage with us on either side so that we are actually delivering.
And that is a very good question, which I don't fully have the answer to, but we're trying to make steps in that direction.
So the consequence of the organisation moving towards a more user-centric approach, both in its digital services and its policy making, feeds into the transformation programme effectively for the organisation. We will need to train ourselves in new skills and to make more investment in this kind of activity. The flip side of that, well, the benefits from that should be that we make better policy, but also I think we could all see examples in the past where a seemingly good idea has either worked brilliantly, but we don't know why, or it's not, or something that should have worked didn't work. So that will take, I think, quite a significant shift in the organisation from old ways of working into something new. So that's a leadership challenge, it's an investment challenge to move in that direction. But this is where many local authorities are going, and obviously a lot of the work of local authorities is closer to delivery and engagement with citizens because they do 500 services to citizens and we do not that many. So this is, in the context of London, part of something much, much broader that's happening right now.
Any other questions?
So let's say if I was looking to design a sprint week or two,
Yep.
Is there sort of any guidance that would help you plan that? But also, I just wanted to know a bit more about your involvement. Would you sort of be able to help me plan that week, or what?
No, that's fine. That's something the digital team are here to do. So yes, it's the short answer. We can help you with that.
And then the guidance side of things.
Yeah. So I'd love to say we have a complete set of wonderful guidance that's been user tested. We have some help for you, and we need more people to come and help us shape that and what's actually useful. So yeah.
Is that on the intranet, is it?
No, it's not. It's a lot of work in progress. Lots of iterations on this stuff. But yeah, it'd be very helpful for people like yourself to come forward and help us shape it. It'd be great. Any other questions? Go.
Slightly unformed question, but I mean, you know, I'm from the community engagement team, so very a big fan of all of this stuff. But I guess when it comes to areas of work that you're not designing either a product or a service, and the policy is quite abstract because it's not something we actually have any control over, but it's like we're developing a policy advocacy position. How, you know, in terms of the amount of time it takes to get user buy-in into the complexity of all the different elements, is that something you guys have done a bit on? So to clarify my point, so for example, something like serious youth violence, and you mentioned that you've done some work on that. We've done a lot of community engagement, which is probably a bit more like the market research, where we're asking people directly, and sometimes the things that they'll say that they need or they want are things that, you know, we know from history or from that have had really bad consequences for communities.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, like, how would some of these approaches help get underneath some of the more nuanced positions, or where you identify the needs and the solutions? And
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough question, because serious youth violence, like many of these, is a very multifactorial issue. It's not just, I can point to that thing, we can fix it, and it all goes away. Obviously, that is the case. And because it's serious youth violence, I could go to certain areas of London where there are hotspots for knife crime. That's a difficult situation to be in as a practitioner, and also as a validity point of view, because I might stand out a mile, being of whatever I am, what segment I am. It's not easy to get a valid view. To answer your question, it's about multiple data points, about from different places, and trying to get that perspective from these multiple different tools or perspectives. That's how I try to do it. That's how user researchers in general try to do it. It is not a perfect science by any stretch, but by trying to get valid multiple samples from multiple data points, you get as clear a view as you reasonably can get.
And I think I would say, you guys know what you're doing. There may be some techniques or methods which you haven't come across, which maybe we could augment what you do.
yeah, and I think in addition to the opinion research teams, there's kind of like a package of support on offer to other teams. I think what we've come across often is when we have conversations with teams about how we can support them, if time is such a crunch point, so actually the amount of time that realistically you need to do this meaningfully is like not within their planning. So they'll be like, well, we need to make a decision, and that's maybe where actually there's some learning from user-centered design, which is faster compared to some of the community engagement methodologies. So.
It might be that we have to find, for that particular problem, a more appropriate methodology, which might be, so there's remote user testing. It might be that the time from event to reporting is just too long, and it's a memory-based thing, and memory isn't awful, frankly. So if it was remote and much quicker and easier, we could actually have community leaders, team leaders, gang leaders, whoever these people are, these influential people, actually come to the GLA interface, whatever that is, in a much shorter remote period of time without having to send somebody down there and all that delay. And by reducing that timescale, my hypothesis is that we get more valid data that helps us have better ideas and try better things.
I had a slightly kind of different question. It was just about whether there's any thought about whether we use our staff as users as well as designers. So where there's quite a lot of change programs on the horizon in terms of, is there a plan to kind of use this methodology in terms of us working out our new ways of working, in terms of thinking about how we use the building, all those different kind of things?
That's exactly the right question. Yes, staff, we are users of our own systems and absolutely should apply this to the way we do things. We are going to be moving that agenda forward as we go through the transformation programme. Haven't got any firm details on how that's going to work, but yes, absolutely want to do that. So be prepared to come and help us test stuff.
But one small aside, what I'm trying to get less of is using internal staff as samples for, say, knife crime or any of the other projects around, because unless you're directly involved with that issue, it's just ticking the boxes, and that's not good enough, and validity is, again, an important thing.
I mean, being a user by proxy is deeply flawed, but yeah, when it's actually our own internal processes, then yeah.
We'll find ways of, whether you're a member of staff or a community, but one of the GLA audiences, of getting your feedback either from your desk remotely, or I come to you, or go to them, or wherever that is whatever is appropriate for that particular. So when there are children involved, or there's violence, there are a number of other concerns. But we will apply user centricity to staff internally to understand your needs of your working day.
Anything else? Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this in a local government and city setting, and your distinction between wants and needs, because of course we have politicians who get contacted by the population with loads of wants, and sometimes they're a little bit difficult to disentangle the want aspect, talking to citizens, or you getting contact from politicians with lots of people wants and what people actually need. And in fact, I suppose all of city government is disentangling wants and needs, I suppose, in one way or another. But is there something distinctive about local government in your experience which makes those challenges more difficult to resolve?
Yes and no. It depends on the issue, because some issues are much more observable from a behavioural point of view, and I find those, at least personally, I find those much easier to deal with. You can staff a team of researchers to handle that. When it's more like knife crime, for example, it's not as, I can't go somewhere to watch knife crime happening, like a football match or whatever thing going on. It's an infrequent event that happens, and there are a bunch of factors that cause that. That's so much harder to try to understand that. Trying to answer your question directly, how do you get to people's needs as opposed to what they want in local government? Multiple samples again. I think sampling is the biggest problem, because traditionally people think user research is expensive and time consuming, because I've got to pay everybody for their travel, their time to come down here, and I've got to do all that, blah, blah, blah. Remote, hopefully, allows us to do bigger samples at less cost. So instead of doing 5 people and going, these represent all of London, we can do 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 until we get a sample of 50 across north, south, east, west, and various socio-economic levels, to get a much better perspective on those needs, rather than just asking 5 people who are friends of friends or whatever they are. Unfortunately, that's not a very sexy answer, but that, I think, is the right answer.
I think it's a way of doing due diligence on identifying the right problem to solve.
I mean, certainly user research, if presented properly, like, in a democratic framework, can show that you've had a robust way in which policy's been developed, and I think that's like a massive advantage. But it also fits within a political process where a lot of the emphasis on user design has been done in the civil service and not to politicians. So for politicians, user design, unless they've got professional experience of it, is quite alien. So we need to kind of find a way of getting this in their minds as a valid way of developing things.
I spent 18 months at the Home Office, and one of the things that kept coming up time and time again was policy intent, and trying to understand what because you've got this legal thing, but then there's this abstraction from it. What does that mean? What are they trying to achieve? What's the intent of that policy? Which is often quite distant from the actual policy itself. And so that's where we struggled in the various fraud teams, trying to understand what's the intent, and then challenging back to it's just a very long, unfortunate process. So I'm hoping that by introducing that evidence base and showing them to them, it's just going to bring those timescales in a little bit, because their cycles are horrible. It takes years.
Can you put your password?
Oh, sure. That one.
When Nick said, I'm sure everyone's on Teams, I kind of went, I bet some of you are on Teams. More of you will get on Teams if you're not already. But what we're looking to do is basically, anyone's interested, start a conversation. We're going to be holding some regular regular sessions, people who are interested to come along, and we'll look at topics around us and how we can do things practically, and do some guidance and all that kind of thing. So, David.
I was just going to say that one of the things that could also be organised if people are interested in, as Martin and Theo have mentioned earlier, there are places both in local and central government that have been doing this kind of thing for a while. So we can bring in some practitioners who can have some case studies of the things that they've done and how this kind of work has really improved the way that they've delivered services for citizens. There's also, if people are really keen, a number of cross-organisation meetups where people can go along and have the same kind of thing but on a much bigger scale with a lot more people involved. So we can circulate some of the dates for that if people might be interested in going along. But we can also invite people here to the kind of sessions and what
yeah. Basically, we can hook you up with other interested and knowledgeable people around this stuff. Really can. Thanks, David. Right, any other questions?
I just had a quick one about whether it's ever common in this kind of process to struggle with recruiting the users to do the testing. I suppose it must be highly dependent on what you're testing and who the kind of group is. But for example, obviously there's detail behind, but just in a nutshell, we're developing a kind of package of support and looking to engage with city officers in other cities. And it feels daunting to try and firstly get to those guys, and secondly get them signed up to kind of reading through a load of stuff and feeding back in the right way, and then perhaps doing it again and be invested in the product in the first place in order to engage properly in testing it and helping us make it as good as it can be. Is that a kind of common feature?
Yeah. So I thought it would be really difficult recruiting, and this is just based on my 6 months experience here. So for example, for the Team London project, it was fantastically easy. Deborah Mars knows all of her audience, and because it's Team London, they're volunteers, the nature of the beast is very positive, and it's going to be, so that was incredibly easy to do. However, we recruited last week on the Young Londoners Fund for Our London, for the map. And they were all providers, so they're all youth workers. But they were all funded by that Young Londoners Fund, so the skew is palpable. Because, I love it, it's great. And it's like, no, don't tell us what you want us to hear just because we're giving you money. These are big problems, and a naive researcher with that would just go, great. So there are just different kinds of problems that arise. So I would say, yes, if you want me to find, knife crime, that's probably going to be potential converts to knife crime, or that kind of thing. That's going to be much more difficult, I would think. Whereas if it's there are certain of our projects which just naturally have audiences associated with them. Some are more biased, some are less biased. So to answer your question in a nutshell, yes, it's not a problem, but we will work with your team to find out who you've got in your network, I'll do the recruitment, but I just need your help with email addresses, telephone numbers, that kind of thing. Typically it's about 2 weeks. I give myself 2 weeks because it usually happens in the last 48 hours. Doesn't matter how much planning you do.
To get them signed up.
To get them signed up, get them in a slot, and to get that day or two lined up. It's typically about 45 minutes maximum. I like to do 20 minutes if possible. For validation research, also for discovery research, it can be an hour. For validation stuff, it tends to be about 20 to 30 minutes. I don't like to get people to do too much. And with discovery stuff, it's like lecturing. If you go past that 30, 40-minute mark, people they just don't have. They start saying things just to get out of there, and they're not saying, you know what I mean? They're not really engaged. So yeah, it's not a problem, but lots of options to work with the various types of audiences you work with.
There are recruitment portals, and there are tools where you can get hold of people. One of our greatest assets is the rest of our colleagues in City Hall, as we all know people, and actually we're well connected with our communities, and it's relatively, we have that advantage. What I would say is, if for any of these processes, whilst we can get recruits relatively quickly often, if you want them ongoing, your stakeholders, you need to give them lots of notice and manage their expectations that they're going to be involved in this, and how often and how long. It doesn't always work.
It would be amazing on our website in the Team London bit, because it's such a volunteering thing, to have just a promo box that says, want to help out, click here.
Just another volunteering opportunity.
Exactly, just some kind of signposting for this, because Team London right now has got its own distinct remit. But anyway.
Yeah. There was a question at the back.
How long do you think it would take to get an organisation of this size working in a more user-centred way?
I love those lovely clear parameters.
Honestly, I'm not allowed to answer the question for it, sorry. I'm literally writing a presentation at the moment that's called Transformation in 20 Sprints, which sounds a little bit grandiose, but believe it or not, when you get stakeholders seeing the outputs and seeing users not able to use the thing that they thought was perfect in every way, the transformation, it's like a melting thing. The momentum, that's just what I've seen on my travels. It's once you get a few doubting Thomases converted with evidence, everything else changes quite quickly.
How quickly would you like to see that? Very good. Good. And are you able and willing to help us with this? Yes. Thank you. Right, on that note, because I think we're running out of time, can I just give Nick a round of applause? Thank you very much, and email us, Teams us, come and see us on the 5th. Have a lovely day.